At 31, Nora had built a quiet, steady life for herself. A small rented apartment, a decent job at the city library, and enough savings to keep the lights on without worrying each month. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. Her mother, however, never failed to remind her that being single at 31 meant she had missed her turn. Nora had stopped defending herself years ago. Her mother's pride and joy had always been Clara, her older sister, 34, married to a well-to-do businessman, and mother to a 6-year-old girl named Leah. Clara was the golden daughter, the one who married early, hosted dinner parties, and posted family photos with matching outfits. Nora, on the other hand, was the one who never settled. For years, she stood at the edge of her own family's conversations, hearing her mother say, "You should learn from your sister." Nora would just smile, nod, and excuse herself to wash the dishes. But behind that quiet calm, she often wondered, why did Leah always look so sad? Whenever Nora visited, the little girl clung to her worn-out stuffed rabbit like it was a lifeline. She barely spoke, rarely smiled, and her eyes, those big brown eyes, carried a heaviness no child should bear. Clara would laugh it off. "She's shy," she'd say, sipping her wine. "You know how kids can be." Nora didn't argue. After all, she wasn't a mother. What did she know? Please like, comment, and subscribe. That illusion shattered one Tuesday morning. Nora was in a staff meeting when her phone buzzed repeatedly. Ignoring it at first, she later saw a voicemail from Child Protection Services. Her heart dropped before she even pressed play. The message was brief. "This is Ms. Karen from CPS. Your name was listed as an emergency contact for a child named Leah. Please return our call immediately." Nora's hands trembled as she called back. The voice on the other end was calm but firm. "Leah's been removed from her mother's care due to reports of neglect," the woman explained. "We need you to come to our office as soon as possible." Nora didn't remember leaving work. She just remembered the sound of her car's tires screeching into the CPS parking lot and the pounding in her chest as she pushed through the glass doors. Inside the waiting room, Nora spotted Leah immediately. The child was sitting in a corner, clutching that same stuffed rabbit, staring blankly at the tiled floor. Her tiny hands were white from gripping it so tightly. Her clothes were too thin for the weather, her hair tangled, her eyes dull. Nora knelt in front of her. "Hey, sweetheart," she whispered. Leah looked up for a moment, then down again. That brief glance told Nora everything. This child had been through something far worse than shyness. A caseworker pulled Nora aside and gave her the bare details. "We've been monitoring the family for months," she said softly. "Your sister often left Leah alone for hours. There were signs of malnutrition, dirty clothes, locking her in rooms as punishment. Someone finally made a report that stuck." Nora felt sick. She had always sensed something was wrong. But this? It was unthinkable. Her phone rang. It was Clara. Nora stepped outside before answering. Clara's voice burst through the speaker, frantic and cracked. "This is all a mistake. You know I'd never hurt Leah. Please tell them that. You have to help me." Nora tried to speak, but Clara kept rambling. Then her tone shifted, sharp and cold. "If you don't give her back, I'll never forgive you." Nora hung up without another word. When she went back inside, Leah was still there, silent, frightened, and alone. Nora took a deep breath and made the decision that would change both their lives. "I'll take her," she told the caseworker. "Whatever it takes, I'll take care of her." The woman nodded solemnly, handing her a stack of temporary custody forms. As Nora signed her name, Leah's tiny fingers reached out to touch hers, and for the first time that day, the little girl whispered, "Thank you." The first few nights after Leah came home with Nora were quietly heartbreaking. The little girl spoke barely above a whisper, refused to eat, and seemed startled by even the gentlest sounds, closing drawers, running water, footsteps in the hallway. Nora moved through the apartment softly, speaking only when necessary, keeping her tone low and kind. She cooked simple meals, rice, soup, mashed potatoes, but Leah only picked at the food. At night, she would lie stiffly in bed, eyes wide open, clutching her stuffed rabbit as if letting go meant something terrible might happen. When she woke up shaking, Nora would rush to her side, hold her gently, and hum lullabies from her own childhood until the trembling stopped. It hurt her deeply to realize that comfort itself was something the child had to learn to trust. Over the following week, Nora began to understand that healing wasn't loud or quick, it was quiet and slow. It started one evening when she noticed Leah staring at a bowl of strawberries on the kitchen counter. "Would you like one?" Nora asked softly. Leah hesitated, then nodded. She took one, bit into it, and for the first time, a faint trace of pleasure flickered in her eyes. From that night on, strawberries became their small ritual, sweet red promises that things could get better. Day by day, Leah began to eat a little more, sleep a little longer, and sometimes, when she thought Nora wasn't looking, she hummed to herself while playing with her toys. But peace never lasts without interruption. One afternoon, while sorting through work files, Nora's phone buzzed with a message from her mother. The words stung even before she finished reading them. "You've taken things too far, Nora. Give the child back. Families don't betray each other." Nora sat there, staring at the message, feeling the familiar ache of being misunderstood. She placed her phone face down and turned her attention to Leah, who was building a crooked tower from plastic blocks on the carpet. The little girl smiled shyly when the tower toppled, and Nora smiled back. In that small, fragile moment, she realized family wasn't about shared blood. It was about who stayed when everything else fell apart. Days slowly turned into weeks, and pieces of truth began to surface through quiet bedtime talks and unexpected questions. Sometimes, Leah would whisper things that made Nora's stomach twist. She spoke of being left alone in dark rooms for hours, of being told not to cry because it made her mother angry, of nights she went to bed hungry. Each word was like glass, sharp and delicate, demanding careful listening. Nora never interrupted, never asked for more than Leah could give. When the child's small voice faltered, Nora simply pulled her close and said the same gentle words every time. "You're safe now, sweetheart. No one will hurt you here." Just when it seemed they were finding a rhythm, the storm arrived. Clara filed for full custody, accusing Nora of manipulation, deceit, and kidnapping. The first court hearing was unbearable. Clara stood tall, her hair perfectly styled, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "She stole my daughter," she said dramatically. Nora sat quietly beside her lawyer, hands clasped, heart pounding. The lawyer responded calmly, presenting photographs, medical documents, and reports from child protection officers. The judge studied each file carefully before ruling that Leah would remain under Nora's temporary care until the investigation concluded. The sound of the gavel was final, sharp, and heavy. Clara turned toward Nora as she stormed out, her face hard with rage. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon light was pale and cold. Nora leaned against her car, taking a long, shaky breath. Leah sat in the back seat, holding her stuffed rabbit in her lap. "I'm sorry this is happening," Nora whispered, meeting the girl's eyes through the rearview mirror. Leah blinked once, then said softly, "It's not your fault." Her small voice carried a strength that caught Nora off guard. She turned away quickly, afraid that if she didn't, the tears pressing at the corners of her eyes would spill over. The weeks that followed were filled with endless meetings, paperwork, and quiet exhaustion. Social workers came and went, always kind but always formal, with clipboards and questions and small nods of approval. They told Nora she had done the right thing, that Leah was finally in a safe place. But right didn't make the nights any easier. When the apartment grew silent after Leah fell asleep, Nora would sit by the window, sipping cold tea, wondering how long the battle would last, and whether her family would ever forgive her for doing what they wouldn't. Clara, meanwhile, turned her energy into spectacle. Her social media accounts became stages for her outrage. She posted long captions about betrayal and injustice, crying in front of cameras, showing old photos of herself and Leah with the caption, "They stole my baby." Some relatives sided with her, convinced by the performance. Others stayed silent, unsure who to believe. Nora refused to respond. She deleted the apps from her phone, choosing instead to spend her evenings reading to Leah and letting their world shrink to something quiet and real. One night, unable to sleep, Nora unlocked her phone again and scrolled through Clara's latest post, a long, venomous paragraph full of half-truths and accusations. Her chest tightened as she read the comments, people arguing about who was right and who was cruel. Then, from the living room, she heard something unexpected, a small, bubbling laugh. Leah was curled up on the couch, watching cartoons, her face glowing with pure, unfiltered joy. It was the first time Nora had ever seen her laugh so freely. The sound filled the room, washing away everything else, the anger, the courtrooms, the noise. For that one brief moment, all that mattered was the laughter of a little girl who was finally learning to be happy again. The next hearing came faster than anyone expected. The courtroom was tense, filled with lawyers, reporters, and curious onlookers whispering behind their hands. Clara arrived dressed in muted colors this time, her face carefully made up to look tired but innocent. Nora sat quietly beside her lawyer, holding a folder full of documents that had already become too familiar. The caseworker's report was detailed, outlining everything Leah had endured: neglect, malnutrition, prolonged isolation. The judge listened, nodding occasionally, his expression grave. When the hearing ended, no final decision was made, but the temporary custody order remained. Leah would stay with Nora for now. Clara left the room without looking back, but the hatred in her silence said everything. Outside the courthouse, the sky was gray, heavy with rain. Nora stood there for a long moment, watching the crowd scatter. She felt drained, not just by the hearing, but by the weight of the story she had been forced to tell. When she finally turned toward her car, she saw Leah waiting inside, drawing shapes on the fogged window with her finger. The child smiled faintly when their eyes met. Nora smiled back, the exhaustion momentarily forgotten. Sometimes, that was all the strength she needed to keep going. A week later, something unexpected happened. A former babysitter, a quiet young woman named Tara, contacted Nora after seeing Clara's online posts. She said she had once worked for the family, but left because of things that didn't feel right. In a trembling voice, she confessed to seeing Leah locked in her room for hours, often crying herself to sleep. She had wanted to report it, but was too afraid of losing her job. Now, she was ready to speak. Nora connected her with the caseworker immediately. Tara's testimony became a turning point in the investigation. While the truth was finally starting to surface, Clara's husband, Derek, began to distance himself from the chaos. In public, he played the role of the innocent man who didn't know what was happening, but the investigation soon revealed that just before CPS intervened, he had quietly moved money from their joint account into one under his name. The discovery cast a shadow over his claims of ignorance. Behind the mask of a polished marriage, cracks were widening fast. Meanwhile, Nora focused all her energy on helping Leah heal. She arranged therapy sessions twice a week, where the little girl began expressing herself through drawings. The therapist said Leah used pictures because words were still too heavy. Each drawing told a story. One house drawn in dark colors, full of frowns and storm clouds, and another bright one, full of light, where two figures held hands. "That's you and me," Leah said one day, pointing at the second picture. Nora's eyes filled with tears as she smiled, her voice catching as she whispered, "Yes, sweetheart, that's us." But Clara wasn't done. One afternoon, Nora received a call from her lawyer. "You need to be prepared," the woman said. "Clara's planning a public stunt." Nora frowned. "What kind of stunt?" The lawyer sighed. "She's invited a local news crew to record a reconciliation meeting. Don't go. It's a trap." Against her better judgment, Nora went anyway. She wanted to believe Clara might finally want to make peace. When she entered the cafe, cameras were already rolling. Clara sat by the window, tissues in hand, pretending to cry as a reporter whispered into a microphone. Nora froze. Without saying a word, she turned and walked out. Later that night, her lawyer's email simply read, "You did the right thing." Following the incident, Leah's therapist strongly advised Nora to cut off all direct contact with Clara for the child's emotional safety. Nora agreed without hesitation. It wasn't easy. Her parents disapproved of the decision, insisting she was making things worse. "You're tearing this family apart," her mother said during their last phone call. "A good sister would help fix this." Nora stayed silent until her mother finished, then said quietly, "A good sister wouldn't have let it happen in the first place." That ended the conversation, and whatever was left of their relationship. As weeks passed, the court ordered a psychological evaluation for Clara. It was meant to assess her emotional stability and parenting ability, but it revealed far more than anyone expected. The report described narcissistic tendencies, difficulty regulating emotions, and an inability to understand or prioritize her child's needs. Though not a formal diagnosis, it painted a troubling picture. Instead of facing her flaws, Clara lashed out again, this time accusing the entire system of corruption. "They're all against me," she shouted outside the courthouse, surrounded by cameras. Her words, once convincing, now sounded desperate. Back at home, Nora watched the news coverage in silence. She wasn't angry anymore, just tired. She turned off the television and walked into the living room, where Leah sat cross-legged on the rug, coloring. "What are you drawing today?" Nora asked gently. Leah held up her paper, showing a bright yellow sun shining over a small house. "It's our home," she said proudly. Nora smiled, kneeling beside her. "It's beautiful," she whispered. In that moment, surrounded by crayons, quiet laughter, and the smell of dinner simmering on the stove, she realized that even in the middle of chaos, love had built something unbreakable. As the legal case stretched into its final stages, Clara's world began to crumble publicly. Her once supportive followers online started questioning her story. Journalists who had covered her tearful interviews began reporting inconsistencies. Screenshots of court records appeared on blogs, showing the timeline of neglect and the medical evidence against her. Each revelation chipped away at the perfect image she had built for years. Yet, even as the truth surfaced, Clara refused to stop. She made late-night live videos, crying and shouting about injustice, claiming everyone, including Nora, had turned against her out of jealousy. Nora stopped watching. It wasn't anger anymore, it was pity. Her parents, however, refused to see reason. Their messages became increasingly harsh. "You need to forgive your sister," her mother wrote one night. "Family isn't about winning battles, it's about standing together." Nora read the words several times before replying with a single sentence. Standing together doesn't mean standing by and doing nothing. After that, her mother stopped responding. It was painful, yes, but freeing too. For the first time in years, Nora realized she didn't owe her family silence. Then came the moment that shook them all. One evening, there was a heavy knock at the door. Nora opened it to find two police officers standing on the porch. "Are you Nora Hale?" one of them asked. "We received a report of a kidnapped child." Nora blinked, momentarily speechless, then let out a breath. "She reported me, didn't she?" she said quietly. The officers exchanged a knowing glance. Nora calmly handed over the custody papers, court orders, and case reports. After reviewing them, the officers apologized and left. Still, the encounter left her hands trembling long after the door closed. The next morning, Clara was officially charged with filing a false police report. It wasn't a major charge, but it carried consequences. Her credibility was shattered, and her outburst was added to her court record. The judge was informed immediately. Nora didn't celebrate. She simply brewed herself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and watched the morning sun spread across the street. For the first time in months, she felt a quiet kind of peace. The truth had a strange way of fighting for itself. A few days later, another shock followed. Clara's husband, Derek, who had distanced himself for months, reached out through his lawyer. He wanted to testify in exchange for leniency. He admitted that while he had never personally harmed Leah, he had known what was happening. He'd heard the crying, seen the bruises, and chosen to ignore them. His silence made him complicit, but it also strengthened the case against Clara. For Nora, hearing his confession was painful, not because it surprised her, but because it confirmed that no one had protected Leah until it was almost too late. Meanwhile, the therapist working with Leah submitted a new report to the court. It stated that the child's anxiety spiked whenever her biological mother's name was mentioned. Leah had begun wetting the bed again, clinging tightly to Nora at night. Her emotional stability depends heavily on a consistent sense of safety, the therapist wrote. The recommendation was clear. All unsupervised contact with the biological mother should cease immediately. It was difficult reading those words, but Nora knew they were necessary. Healing couldn't grow in fear. Despite the growing mountain of evidence, Clara refused to let go. She began showing up uninvited to places she wasn't allowed: schools, daycare centers, even Nora Street. One afternoon, she parked her car across from the house and sat there for nearly an hour. Nora saw her through the window, sitting motionless, hands gripping the steering wheel. She called the authorities immediately. By the time the patrol car arrived, Clara had driven off, but the report was filed. Each act of defiance only pushed the court further toward a final ruling. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. Nora received a frantic call from Leah's daycare. Clara had shown up, demanding to see her daughter, shouting that she was there to take her home. The staff, already aware of the legal situation, locked the doors and called the police. By the time officers arrived, Clara was in the parking lot, screaming and pounding the hood of her car. The arrest was swift and quiet. The next day, every news outlet carried the story: mother arrested for attempted child abduction. The image of Clara being led away in handcuffs was splashed across social media. For Nora, it was both surreal and deeply sad. That night, as the news played faintly in the background, Nora sat beside Leah's bed, brushing the child's hair back gently. Leah stirred, half asleep, then mumbled, "Mommy, you're staying, right?" Nora froze for a moment, then smiled softly. "Always," she whispered. It wasn't a promise made out of pity or fear. It was a truth she had already been living. No matter what came next, she knew this fight had never been about winning a case. It had always been about saving a little girl who deserved a chance to feel safe in her own home. The final custody hearing arrived on a quiet morning that felt heavier than the sky itself. Nora woke before dawn, unable to sleep. She ironed her blouse twice, even though it didn't need it, and packed Leah's favorite drawing, 2 stick figures holding hands under a yellow sun, into her bag for comfort. At the courthouse, the same judge presided, calm but stern. When Clara entered, she looked transformed, her hair neatly tied, a Bible clutched in one hand, her eyes shining with rehearsed tears. It was a performance Nora had seen before, but this time, the audience wasn't buying it. When the hearing began, Clara spoke first. Her voice trembled as she pleaded for forgiveness, insisting she had just made mistakes out of love. But her words rang hollow. The judge interrupted firmly. "Attempting to take a child in violation of a court order is not love, Mrs. Dawson, it's a crime." Clara fell silent. Then, one by one, the witnesses were called. Caseworkers, therapists, the babysitter. Each person described, in calm detail, what Leah had endured. Nora sat quietly, clutching the little girl's drawing in her lap, her throat tight. Then came the most unexpected moment: Derek's testimony. Dressed in a plain suit, he avoided Clara's eyes as he admitted that he had known more than he ever said. "I didn't stop her," he confessed softly. "And that's something I'll have to live with." The room fell silent. Even the clicking of pens paused. For a moment, Clara's face twisted, rage, disbelief, and humiliation flashing all at once. The final evidence was presented by CPS: medical reports, psychological assessments, and witness statements that painted a heartbreaking but undeniable picture. Leah had suffered long-term neglect and emotional trauma. The psychologist testified that the child consistently expressed fear when her mother's name was mentioned and displayed visible anxiety at the thought of returning to her. The judge listened quietly, his expression unreadable. Then he folded his hands, took a breath, and spoke. "The court grants full legal custody to Ms. Nora Hale. All parental rights of the biological mother are hereby terminated." The room seemed to exhale all at once. Clara's shoulders stiffened as she stared ahead, unblinking. Then, slowly, her mask cracked. "You stole my child," she hissed, her voice shaking. "You'll regret this." The bailiff moved closer, ready to intervene. The judge simply said, "Mrs. Dawson, control yourself or be removed." Clara turned to Nora one last time, her expression a mixture of fury and despair. "I just wanted to be a good mother," she sobbed. But the words echoed hollow against the quiet courtroom walls. When the gavel came down, it was over. Nora walked out into the sunlight feeling lighter and heavier all at once. Outside, her parents were waiting, not to congratulate her, but to plead once more for reconciliation. "You can still fix this," her mother said softly. "Apologize to your sister. Bring her back into the family." Nora looked at them, really looked at them, and realized they still didn't see. "I already have a family," she said quietly, glancing toward the car where Leah sat waiting. "I'm just choosing to protect it this time." She walked away, without looking back. Weeks passed, and the paperwork moved quickly. The adoption process began, and for the first time in a long while, Nora's home felt peaceful. Leah started laughing more often, sleeping soundly through the night, and filling the apartment walls with crayon drawings of sunshine and hearts. Neighbors began stopping by, bringing small gifts or kind words. Even some of Clara's old friends reached out to apologize, admitting they had believed the wrong person. Nora accepted their words graciously, but her focus remained on Leah. The only apology that truly mattered had already been given through a child's smile. On a bright afternoon, a letter arrived in the mail. Inside was the official document declaring Leah's adoption final. Nora read it twice, her hands trembling. That evening, she cooked Leah's favorite dinner, pancakes and strawberries, and placed the letter on the table with a little ribbon tied around it. "What's this?" Leah asked, her eyes wide. "It means," Nora said softly, kneeling to her level, "that you get to stay with me forever." Leah blinked, then threw her arms around her, whispering, "I already knew that." That night, after Leah fell asleep, Nora stood by her bedroom door watching her breathe peacefully. The stuffed rabbit lay beside her on the pillow, worn but loved. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the night breeze through the curtains. Nora smiled, feeling a calm she hadn't known in years. Outside, the world was still complicated, noisy, and unfair. But inside this little home, love had rebuilt what pain had broken. She whispered into the dark, not as a promise, but as a truth she now lived by, forever and always.